The morning sun barely pierced through the curtains of the sprawling estate, casting a faint glow over the elegant marble floors and gleaming, polished furniture. Inside, the air was still, a sense of serenity hanging like a delicate veil over everything. The home of renowned artist Marcus Devereux stood in stark contrast to the chaos that would soon unfold. Unbeknownst to Marcus, his life was about to be turned upside down. A call had been made to the police, a tip-off claiming illegal activities happening behind the walls of this mansion, but the caller didn't know the half of it. They had no idea who they were targeting. The officers arrived, armed with search warrants and a misplaced sense of certainty, convinced they were about to uncover something sinister. But what they didn't know was that the target was no ordinary man. Marcus Devereux was not a criminal. He was a creator, a visionary with a reputation so vast that his name resonated across galleries and auction houses worldwide. His work commanded millions, and his fortune was as substantial as the canvases he painted on. The police approached the grand mansion with the usual tension of an unexpected raid. Officers positioned themselves in tactical formation, their radios crackling with orders, as they prepared to breach the front door. There was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, a grim certainty that the tip-off was legitimate. With a nod, they made their move. The sound of the door crashing open echoed through the grand hallway, shaking the house out of its calm reverie. Officers, dressed in their full tactical gear, flooded the entrance like an unstoppable tide, their boots thudding against the pristine floors as they rushed in. Their guns were drawn, and their eyes darted around the space, scanning every corner for signs of danger. They were ready to confront a criminal, to seize evidence of illegal activities. But what they didn't expect was what they found instead. Marcus Devereux, the man they came to arrest, was sitting in the middle of the living room. He remained remarkably calm as the officers burst in. He didn't flinch. His posture was composed, almost regal. The man standing before them was no criminal, he was an artist, a man of elegance and poise. His attire alone spoke volumes, a crisp white shirt, tailored slacks, and a designer blazer that hinted at the wealth and status he had accumulated over decades of dedication to his craft. He looked up from his easel, where he was working on a new masterpiece, as though the armed officers were nothing more than a mild distraction. The officers were momentarily taken aback. They had expected a frantic confrontation, maybe even resistance, but instead, they found themselves face to face with an individual who didn't seem fazed at all by their presence. His home, though extravagant, didn't have the rough edges of a criminal's hideout. On the contrary, it was a reflection of his success. Exquisite furniture, high-end art pieces, rare sculptures, and antique furniture filled the room. But what struck the officers most was the collection of paintings that lined the walls. Every painting was a masterpiece, vivid in its colors and profound in its emotion. From classical landscapes to modern abstracts, the walls told the story of a man whose soul was poured into every brushstroke. But the officers were too focused on their mission to appreciate the beauty surrounding them. The leader of the raid stepped forward, trying to assert control of the situation. "Mr. Devereux," he said, his voice steady but laced with the tension of the moment. "We've received information regarding illegal activities at this address. We're here to investigate." Marcus regarded the officer calmly, his face a picture of serenity, as though the words had no weight. He stood up gracefully from his easel, his movements slow but deliberate. His eyes, warm and measured, met the officer's gaze. "I understand," he said simply, his voice smooth but carrying an undertone of authority. "But I assure you, there is no illegal activity here. Just art. Just creation. And perhaps, a misunderstanding." The officer was momentarily at a loss. He had expected a confrontation, not a calm explanation. As he looked around the room, the reality of the situation started to sink in. He saw what Marcus had seen. The space was filled with valuable, unmistakable works of art. The officer's gaze shifted to the portrait of a young woman on the wall, painted in the most exquisite detail, so lifelike that it seemed as though she could step out of the canvas at any moment. It was a piece that could fetch millions at auction. As Marcus continued to explain, the officers realized they had entered a world they didn't understand. Marcus spoke not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence, his words carefully chosen, like a teacher guiding his students through a lesson they had never encountered. "I've dedicated my life to my craft. Art is my language, and my work has always been transparent. You'll find no criminal activity here, only a man in the pursuit of beauty." His calmness disarmed the officers, and as they looked around, they began to feel the weight of their misunderstanding. There was no stash of drugs, no arms hidden in the basement, no illicit goods concealed behind secret compartments. Just walls filled with pieces that told the story of a man who had ascended to the heights of artistic mastery. The raid, once so filled with tension and suspicion, now seemed out of place in this home of culture and refinement. The police, still holding their positions but no longer certain of what they were looking for, began to realize they had misjudged the situation entirely. Marcus Devereux was no criminal. He was, in fact, the complete opposite. What started as an aggressive search for something criminal had instead become a quiet revelation of the power and beauty of art, a moment where a master of his craft was unfairly pulled from his work. And as the officers slowly lowered their weapons, their faces betrayed a mixture of awe and embarrassment, realizing that they had walked into the world of a man whose wealth and success were not built on illicit actions, but on the transformative power of creation itself. The tip-off, made by someone who had no idea who they were truly dealing with, was wrong in every way. The only thing that had been illegal was the mistake made by the authorities in underestimating the life of an artist. Before the police raid and the unexpected confrontation, Marcus Devereux had faced an entirely different battle, the battle for recognition in an art world that seemed to have little room for someone like him. Despite his raw talent, impeccable technique, and passion for his craft, Marcus was still struggling to break through the barriers of an elitist art world that had already decided who deserved a seat at the table. His name, though beginning to circulate in smaller circles, had not yet attained the prestige of the great masters. He was still a name that wasn't quite known, and he longed for the opportunity to show the world what he could do. It was during this period of self-doubt and frustration that Marcus found himself standing before the owner of one of the most renowned galleries in the city, a man whose reputation for discerning taste and cutting-edge curation was well established. The gallery owner, Vincent Hawthorne, was known for his sharp eye and even sharper tongue. If he gave an artist his endorsement, it could launch their career into the stratosphere. However, if he deemed an artist unworthy, the artist could find themselves relegated to obscurity, their work never seeing the light of day again. Marcus had prepared for this moment for years. He spent days, weeks, and months perfecting his collection, carefully selecting each piece to represent his growth as an artist. His paintings were filled with emotion, capturing human struggles, triumphs, and the beauty of life itself. He poured his heart and soul into every brushstroke, and as he stood in front of the large canvas, he knew that the works before him could change the art world forever. He believed this gallery was his ticket to recognition, the platform he needed to take his place among the greats. As Marcus entered the sleek, white-walled gallery, the polished floors reflecting the elegance of the space, he felt a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet confidence. His portfolio of work was tucked under his arm, ready to be presented. The walls around him were adorned with works of famous artists, their names displayed like sacred relics. He was not yet among them, but he knew his time would come, or so he hoped. Vincent Hawthorne was a tall, well-dressed man, his appearance as pristine as the gallery itself. When Marcus was finally ushered into his office, he found the gallery owner seated behind a large mahogany desk, scribbling notes into a leather-bound notebook. He didn't look up immediately, leaving Marcus to stand in front of him. The tension in the air was palpable, and Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. He had dreamed of this meeting for so long, but now that it was here, his words felt stuck in his throat. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Hawthorne looked up. His gaze was cold, calculating, and the faintest hint of disinterest lingered in his eyes. He didn't smile, didn't offer a handshake, merely gestured to the portfolio that Marcus had placed on the desk. "What do you have for me?" he asked, his voice as smooth and dismissive as a velvet glove. Marcus, still trying to steady his nerves, opened the portfolio and began to explain the meaning behind each of his paintings. He spoke passionately about his inspirations, the emotions he had channeled into each piece, and the stories he hoped to tell through his work. His words flowed with the ease of someone who truly believed in what they had created. But as he spoke, he could see Hawthorne's disinterest grow. The gallery owner's eyes darted briefly to the pieces, then back to Marcus, before he sighed heavily, a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet of the room. "Is this some kind of joke?" Hawthorne muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. His voice was laced with incredulity, his lips curling into a smirk. "These works, they're amateur at best. There's no soul here, no depth. It's as if you're trying too hard to say something profound when there's nothing profound to say." Marcus's heart sank. He had anticipated a critical assessment, but not this level of disdain. He had been prepared for tough criticism, but Hawthorne's ridicule felt like a sharp slap to his face. The gallery owner continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "I've seen thousands of artists come through these doors, and not a single one of them has failed to make an impression. But this is nothing more than paint splattered on a canvas. It's safe, uninspired, and frankly, beneath the standards of this gallery." Marcus stood frozen, feeling the sting of Hawthorne's words cut deeper with each passing second. It was as though all his years of hard work, all the sleepless nights spent perfecting his craft, had been reduced to nothing more than a fleeting joke. The gallery owner wasn't just rejecting his work, he was dismissing his very identity as an artist. Without another word, Hawthorne waved his hand dismissively, signaling the end of the meeting. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Devereux, but we won't be moving forward with your work. Perhaps you should consider finding a more suitable audience." The humiliation was unbearable. Marcus packed up his portfolio in silence, trying to hold back the tears of frustration that threatened to spill. As he left the gallery, he could hear Hawthorne's voice in the background, already moving on to the next artist, his focus elsewhere. To Hawthorne, Marcus was nothing but another failed attempt at art, a name that wouldn't matter in the end. But Marcus knew something that the gallery owner did not. He knew the power of silence, of perseverance, and of quiet rebellion. He walked away from the rejection with a resolve that could not be shaken. He didn't need the validation of one man to prove his worth. He would show the world, in time, just what he was capable of. He would build his empire, brick by brick, and when he did, he would make sure that Hawthorne would never be able to ignore him again. Marcus withdrew from the public eye. He didn't seek the spotlight or chase after recognition. Instead, he worked in solitude, honing his craft with unwavering focus. He spent months in his studio, experimenting with new styles, techniques, and concepts. His paintings became more bold, more refined, and more unique with every stroke. He took his rejection not as a failure, but as a spark, a fire that drove him to prove the gallery owner wrong. Each piece he created felt like a declaration, an act of defiance against those who doubted him. In the years that followed, Marcus's work began to gain attention, but not from the art world he had once sought approval from. His paintings started to appear in private collections, hidden from the public eye. Wealthy individuals, collectors with an eye for rare and unique works, began to seek him out. His pieces were sold for staggering sums, often at auctions where the most discerning art connoisseurs vied for a chance to own a piece of his genius. The public, unaware of Marcus's quiet ascent, began to take notice when his works began to appear in prestigious collections and private museums. By the time Marcus's name finally reached the ears of the broader art world, it was too late. The gallery that had once mocked him had long since faded into the background, its influence dwindling as the market for his art grew. Marcus had built an empire of his own, one that had nothing to do with validation from others. He was now a force in the art world, a self-made legend whose work was worth millions. The very man who had once laughed him off was now scrambling to get a glimpse of the artist who had been so beneath him. Marcus eventually crossed paths with Vincent Hawthorne again. It was at an exclusive gala celebrating his latest exhibition. The gallery owner, now a shadow of the man he once was, approached Marcus with a hollow smile. "Mr. Devereux," he began, his voice tinged with desperation, "I must say, your work has become quite remarkable. I never realized the potential you had back then. Marcus smiled, his eyes glinting with quiet satisfaction. He didn't need to say anything. His success spoke volumes louder than any words ever could. The twist of fate was complete. The artist had risen from the ashes of rejection, proving to the world, and to Hawthorne, that true greatness could never be dismissed. The sun was low in the sky when the police arrived at the sprawling estate of Marcus Devereux, their sirens wailing through the quiet streets. The tip they had received had sent them here, to what appeared to be a mansion of opulence and grandeur. A neighborhood known for its exclusivity, where the gates of each home stood like sentinels, guarding the wealth within. The caller, anonymous and cloaked in a sense of secrecy, had painted a picture of criminal activity hidden behind the elegant walls of this home. Drug trafficking, illicit deals, something nefarious. The exact details were murky, but the police were told to expect the worst. The officers were trained to act swiftly and decisively. When they received a tip about potential criminal activity, especially in a high-profile area like this, there was no room for hesitation. They moved with precision, their steps coordinated as they descended upon Marcus's estate. The house stood like a fortress, its high walls and perfectly manicured gardens offering no clue as to what lay inside. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another home filled with wealth, luxury, and privilege. But to the officers, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved, a puzzle that they believed had hidden something much darker. With a nod from the officer in charge, the team moved to breach the front door. The doorbell rang out, but before anyone could answer, they were inside, guns drawn, and ready for action. The atmosphere inside was sharp, tense, as the officers fanned out through the house, searching for evidence of criminal activity. Each room they entered was more elegant than the last, filled with high-end furniture, rare antiques, and an overwhelming collection of artwork. But as they scanned the lavish interior, something didn't sit right with the officer in charge, Detective Samuel Pierce. His sharp eyes flicked from one painting to the next, his thoughts beginning to swirl with suspicion. This was no ordinary home. The walls were adorned with paintings, not cheap reproductions, but striking, emotionally charged pieces that spoke of a life devoted to creativity. Landscapes so vivid they almost seemed alive, portraits so raw they seemed to capture the very soul of their subjects. There were sculptures placed with deliberate care, each one unique and masterful in its execution. The artwork was lavish, not the kind one would expect to see in a place tied to criminal activity. It was high-end, and something about it made Pierce uneasy. As the officers moved deeper into the house, the unsettling feeling grew. It wasn't just the art that raised questions. It was the atmosphere. The entire home seemed to scream wealth, and that alone, to Pierce, was enough to fuel his suspicions. "Looks like we've got another rich criminal here," he muttered under his breath. His thoughts shifted to the drug trade, to the possibility of laundering money through art, a tactic used by some to conceal their illegal activities. These people think they can hide behind their fancy walls and expensive tastes, he thought, his mind already preparing for what he assumed would be the inevitable discovery of a hidden stash of illicit materials. The officers moved cautiously, their weapons at the ready. The kitchen was pristine, the living room immaculate, but it was the study that really caught Pierce's attention. A large painting hung above the grand fireplace, a work so intricate, so bold, it seemed to pulse with life. A portrait of a woman, her eyes so hauntingly lifelike that they seemed to follow him wherever he went. Her expression was enigmatic, as if she held a secret that could shatter the world. Pierce didn't know art, but he knew that something about this painting didn't sit right. It was too polished, too refined for someone who was involved in the kind of crimes they were expecting. "Where is the owner?" Pierce asked, his voice curt, as he turned to the officers who had been sweeping the other rooms. One officer, his hand still gripping his firearm, replied, "We haven't seen anyone yet. The place is quiet. No signs of forced entry." Before Pierce could respond, a voice interrupted him, calm, collected, almost disarmingly so. "Is there a problem, officers?" The voice came from the doorway leading into the study. Standing in the frame was Marcus Devereux, dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored suit, his demeanor as poised as a man who had seen it all. He held a glass of water in his hand, and his gaze was steady as he assessed the officers before him. His eyes, though calm, bore a certain intensity. The artist was completely unfazed, as though this sort of intrusion was a minor inconvenience in his otherwise tranquil life. The officers froze. For a moment, Pierce couldn't decide what bothered him more, the fact that the man seemed so relaxed, or the way he stood there, effortlessly commanding the room. There was something undeniably confident about him, an air of superiority that made Pierce's skin crawl. It wasn't the behavior of someone who had just been caught in the middle of criminal activity. "We're investigating a tip," Pierce said, his voice laced with authority. "We've been told this residence is connected to illegal activities." Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't flinch. "Illegal activities?" he echoed. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed. This is a home, not a criminal enterprise." Pierce stepped forward, his eyes scanning Marcus from head to toe. The artist's calm demeanor only seemed to irritate him further. "A home filled with more money than most people see in a lifetime," he muttered, glancing at the ornate furniture and the expensive decor. "There's something not right here, Mr. Devereux." At that moment, one of the younger officers, Officer Roberts, who had been silently surveying the paintings on the wall, spoke up in a tone that was surprisingly respectful. "Sir, is that your work?" Marcus's gaze flicked to the officer, a small, almost imperceptible smile curling at the corner of his lips. "Yes, it is," he said softly. "I am Marcus Devereux. I'm an artist." Officer Roberts took a step closer to the painting he had been studying, his eyes widening with recognition. "Wait a minute, this is your piece?" He gestured to the large canvas, his fingers trembling slightly. "This is The Silent Witness, isn't it?" Marcus's brow furrowed slightly in surprise. "It is. I didn't realize that someone here was familiar with my work." Roberts looked stunned. He knew the piece. In fact, he had seen it in a private art collection several years ago, though he had never expected to find it in a place like this. The painting, known for its haunting depiction of a woman standing in the shadows, was one of Marcus's most famous works. It had been sold at auction for a staggering sum, over $10 million. At the time, it had made headlines in the art world, and for good reason. The officer was stunned, his eyes wide as he turned back to Pierce. "Detective, this is Marcus Devereux, the artist. His work, his entire collection is worth millions." Pierce looked from the painting to the officer, his mind racing as he processed the new information. His eyes narrowed. "So, you're telling me this isn't some front for a drug ring or money laundering operation?" Roberts shook his head in disbelief. "No, sir. This is genuine. This man, he's a major figure in the art world. His paintings are incredibly valuable." A heavy silence fell over the room as Pierce absorbed the new revelation. For a moment, he felt a deep sense of embarrassment wash over him. He had been ready to label Marcus a criminal, to assume that his wealth had been earned through less than legal means. Instead, he was standing in the midst of a home filled with the works of a legitimate artist, someone whose talent and success had been built over years of dedication. Marcus, sensing the shift in the room, spoke quietly, his voice carrying the weight of both frustration and understanding. "I understand why you're here. But I assure you, I am not a criminal. I am an artist, and this is the result of a lifetime of work. If you want to investigate, I will cooperate fully. But I would appreciate it if you would treat this house and its contents with respect." Pierce stood still for a moment, his pride bruised. He had been so quick to judge, so sure of the narrative in his mind, that he had missed the truth. Slowly, he holstered his weapon, nodding to his team. The raid, though well-intentioned, had been a mistake. As the officers began to retreat, Pierce turned to Marcus, his tone softer now. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Devereux. It seems we had the wrong information." Marcus gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. "It's all right, detective. I understand. But next time, perhaps a little more investigation before making assumptions might be wise." With that, the officers filed out of the house, leaving Marcus standing in the quiet of his art-filled sanctuary, the weight of the moment settling in. The misjudgment had been clear, but the truth had prevailed. The artist, once dismissed by the authorities, had proven that his success was not born from criminal deeds, but from the unwavering power of his craft. As the police raid continued, the tension in the air was thick and unyielding. Detective Pierce, having already misjudged Marcus Devereux, was beginning to feel the weight of his earlier assumptions. The house, filled with luxury and intricate artwork, now felt like a maze of contradictions, and the deeper they went, the more confused he became. He had entered with a mission, to uncover criminal activity, but as the minutes passed, that mission began to feel hollow. The mansion's walls were adorned with paintings so exquisite they defied what he had expected to find. As the officers moved from room to room, carefully searching for hidden drugs or weapons, one officer, Officer Rachel Callahan, found herself straying from the group. A few yards away from the main living room, Callahan noticed a door slightly ajar, tucked away behind a large, gilded mirror. Unlike the rest of the rooms in the house, this one was hidden from view. She stepped forward, cautiously, drawn to the intrigue of what might lie behind it. Her instincts told her that this room was different, that it was something more than just another part of the house. With a creak, the door swung open to reveal a space unlike any she had seen in the mansion before. It was a private gallery, but not in the way that the rest of the house had displayed its art. This room was dimly lit, the air heavy with a sense of reverence. The walls were lined with rare and historical works, each piece more breathtaking than the last. The pieces were not the sort of modern art that had filled the main halls, these were treasures, pieces from centuries past, each one bearing the hallmarks of great artistic movements. There were sketches, old portraits, and even several sculptures, each a masterpiece in its own right. Callahan felt a chill run down her spine as she stepped into the space, her heart racing with the sudden realization that she was standing in a room that held a legacy. As her eyes scanned the walls, she began to piece together a story that hadn't been told to her by anyone. Each painting, each sculpture, seemed to tell a part of it. It was more than just a personal collection, it was a testament to something far greater, a lineage of artists and visionaries who had passed down their passion and talent across generations. One of the pieces that caught her eye was an ancient oil painting, dark and brooding in its tones, yet rich with depth and emotion. The artist had captured a moment of tragic beauty, a young woman, standing in a storm, her figure cloaked in flowing fabric that seemed to move with the wind. The painting was centuries old, its edges worn with time, but its impact was immediate. It was a portrait that stirred something deep within her, something beyond the surface level of its visual appeal. There was a raw energy to it, a sense of history that resonated, as though it had been passed down through time from one great hand to another. Callahan stepped closer, her hand gently brushing against the frame, and she noticed a subtle signature in the corner, Devereux. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just any painting. This was one of the earliest works of the Devereux family. Her mind began to whirl as she connected the dots. She had heard whispers about the Devereux name in art circles before, murmurs of a family with a deep legacy in the art world, spanning generations. But nothing she had ever heard had suggested that the family's legacy was so far-reaching, so rich in its history. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. Marcus Devereux wasn't just an artist with an impressive portfolio, he was part of a lineage that had shaped art movements for centuries. His works weren't just contemporary masterpieces, they were the continuation of a heritage that traced back to some of the most significant periods in art history. This hidden gallery was a testament to a legacy that had been carefully preserved, one that few had ever had the privilege of witnessing. Callahan moved from one painting to the next, her hands trembling as she took in the details. She could feel the significance of each piece, the weight of its history. One painting in particular stopped her in her tracks, a large canvas depicting a battle scene from the Renaissance. The figures were rendered in stunning detail, with each soldier and each piece of armor capturing a moment of perfect clarity. The artist had poured an incredible amount of skill into the piece, and yet, the most extraordinary part of it was the fact that the work had been painted by an ancestor of Marcus Devereux, a famous painter from the 16th century who had been known for his groundbreaking contributions to the era. She was staring at an original painting that had survived through centuries, a work that, in its time, had been revolutionary. But it wasn't just the historical significance that left Callahan stunned. As she marveled at the artwork, she began to see the connections between the works. They weren't just family heirlooms, they were part of an ongoing evolution of artistic style. Marcus, the man she had assumed was a simple, wealthy artist with no depth, had in fact inherited not only the talents of his ancestors but the weight of their artistic vision. He was a direct heir to a lineage of groundbreaking artists, each of whom had left their mark on the world. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took in the full scope of what she had uncovered. Marcus Devereux's paintings, now scattered around the world, had a value far beyond anything the officers had expected. These weren't just pieces of art that commanded millions, they were the very legacy of a family that had shaped the course of art history. In that moment, Callahan realized just how wrong they had been to assume that this mansion, filled with wealth and beauty, was simply the result of a successful artist's career. It was the culmination of centuries of work, a family legacy that had, until now, remained hidden from the world. She stood there, breathless, staring at the paintings that told a story far larger than the one they had assumed. The raid, which had begun as a mission to uncover criminal activity, had now revealed something far more profound, the hidden history of a family that had shaped art movements for generations. These works, which had once been dismissed as simple luxuries of the wealthy, were now pieces of history, and they held value that extended far beyond their financial worth. As Callahan absorbed the gravity of her discovery, she knew that she couldn't simply dismiss what she had found. These paintings weren't just the creations of an artist with a notable name, they were part of a legacy that had been woven through the tapestry of time. The officer, once convinced of the artist's supposed criminal ties, was now standing on the precipice of a revelation that would forever alter her understanding of what true artistic greatness was. Callahan's heart ached with the weight of it all. She wasn't just standing in a hidden gallery, she was standing in the very soul of art history. As she turned to leave, a deep sense of respect for Marcus Devereux, and his family's legacy, settled over her like a shroud. This raid, which had begun with a simple misjudgment, had uncovered a treasure trove of invaluable history. The only question now was whether the world would ever learn the true story of the Devereux family, and how much of it had been hidden away, right under their noses. The day after the raid, Marcus Devereux found himself sitting in the quiet of his studio, staring at the unfinished canvas before him. It was a strange feeling, the serenity of his work juxtaposed with the chaos that had erupted outside his home. The police had come, a misunderstanding driven by misinformation, and in the process, his name had inadvertently been thrust into the spotlight. What had begun as an intrusion had, unexpectedly, become the catalyst for something far greater than he could have imagined. He had never sought fame or attention. For years, Marcus had worked in the shadows, focusing on his art, cultivating his craft in solitude. His creations had been quietly accumulating value, slowly gaining attention among select collectors, but he had remained largely unknown to the art world at large. The work he had so carefully honed in isolation was now set to be unveiled to the world, but not through the path he had imagined. It wasn't his exhibitions or auctions that were giving his work the notoriety it deserved, it was the very scandal of the raid itself that had inadvertently brought the public's gaze upon him. It started with the art experts, those who had heard rumors about the Devereux name, but had never taken the time to look closely. Within hours of the news breaking, whispers began circulating across art forums, social media, and in private circles. The mystery surrounding Marcus's background only added fuel to the fire. Art historians, curators, and collectors from around the world began diving into research, eager to discover the truth behind the artist and his works. It wasn't long before the first breakthrough occurred, the painting that had been discovered in the private gallery during the raid. That hauntingly beautiful piece, The Silent Witness, had caught the eye of Officer Roberts, who had recognized its value. Soon after, it was identified by the leading experts as one of the most important pieces in Marcus's entire collection, a work that bridged the gap between classical portraiture and modern expressionism. The piece had been sold for tens of millions at an auction several years ago, and suddenly, it was clear that Marcus Devereux was not simply an artist on the rise, he was a living legend whose work was linked to one of the most significant family legacies in art history. As the news spread, it quickly became apparent that Marcus's works were far more valuable than anyone had imagined. Curators began to trace the origins of his family's art collection, uncovering a lineage that reached back centuries. The Devereux name was associated with artists who had influenced entire movements, from the Renaissance to the modern era. His great-grandfather had been an acclaimed sculptor, his father an avant-garde painter whose works had been banned during certain political regimes. It was clear that Marcus was not just part of a family tradition, he was the culmination of a centuries-old creative legacy. Art experts flooded Marcus's private gallery with requests for exhibitions, eager to showcase the pieces that had remained hidden for so long. The rare works, some of which were previously thought lost or destroyed, were now revered as priceless treasures. The private collectors who had already acquired pieces from Marcus's earlier works began selling them for astronomical prices, knowing that the demand for his art would only increase. What had once been a small, niche market for his paintings was now turning into an international phenomenon. Art auction houses were lining up to secure exclusive sales, eager to capitalize on the new frenzy surrounding his name. The media, once indifferent to the artist, now sought to interview him at every turn. Journalists and art critics were eager to hear the story behind the man who had been living under the radar for so long. The mysterious circumstances of the raid, combined with the newfound awareness of Marcus's heritage and talent, made him a figure of intrigue. His work had become the subject of countless articles, debates, and analyses. Marcus Devereux was no longer just an artist, he was a cultural sensation, a figure who symbolized the power of legacy and the mystery of artistic creation. As galleries from around the world sent invitations to Marcus, it wasn't long before one particular invitation caught his attention, the prestigious New York gallery, Hawthorne and Company. A letter, elegantly penned and professionally bound, arrived at his doorstep. The letter was from none other than Vincent Hawthorne, the very man who had mocked Marcus's work just a few years prior. The letter, though polite, had a tone of desperation beneath its formal veneer. "Dear Mr. Devereux," it began. "It is with great admiration that we extend an invitation to you to exhibit your collection at our gallery. Your work has garnered significant attention following the recent developments, and we believe that it is the perfect time for our gallery to showcase the brilliance of your art to the world. We would be honored to work with you and would like to discuss a potential collaboration." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he read the letter. It was clear that Hawthorne and Company now wanted something he had once been denied: access to his name and his art. The gallery that had once laughed at his work was now desperate to associate itself with his newfound success. The same man who had told him his paintings were beneath the standards of the gallery now sought to align himself with Marcus's soaring reputation. In the days that followed, Marcus was bombarded with offers from several other prominent galleries, each eager to claim a piece of his rising star. The art world was hungry for him, and his work had become a ticket to unparalleled prestige. The auction houses wanted exclusivity, the galleries wanted exhibitions, and the collectors were ready to spend fortunes to own a piece of history. Every offer that came through the door seemed more generous than the last. Despite the growing wave of attention and acclaim, Marcus couldn't help but think back to the rejection he had faced years earlier. It was a bitter reminder of how quickly people's perceptions could change when they saw the potential for profit. Hawthorne, the same man who had belittled his art, was now eager to sign a deal that would benefit both of them. But Marcus wasn't naive. He knew that the world of art was driven by both passion and commerce, and he had the power to navigate that balance now. He had built something far more valuable than just wealth, he had built a legacy, one that would never be defined by a single gallery's opinion. As Marcus considered his options, he realized that the true power he held now was not in the hands of galleries or collectors. It was in his ability to choose where his art would go and who he would allow to represent it. The value of his work had already been established, and the demand for his art was only growing. It was no longer a matter of proving his worth, it was about selecting the partners who truly respected his vision. He decided to meet with Vincent Hawthorne, not to beg for validation, but to set the terms. The meeting was scheduled at the gallery, a sleek space filled with contemporary works from the world's biggest names. When Marcus arrived, Hawthorne was waiting for him, a smile that barely masked his desperation. The two men shook hands, but there was no warmth in the gesture. The gallery owner, though outwardly respectful, couldn't hide the urgency in his voice as he spoke of the opportunity to showcase Marcus's works. "Mr. Devereux," Hawthorne said, his voice almost pleading, "we've been following your success, and we believe that a collaboration between us could take your career to unprecedented heights. We'd be honored to host your collection in our gallery. We've already made arrangements for a major exhibition." Vincent had spent the last few days trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. He'd made several attempts to reach out to Marcus, sending polite emails, offering deals, trying to rebuild bridges, but the artist had been elusive, unwilling to engage. He knew that Marcus had every right to be upset. After all, it wasn't just the rejection that had been humiliating. It was the public nature of that rejection, the way Hawthorne had mocked Marcus's talent in front of his peers, the way he had been so sure that Marcus's work was beneath the standards of his gallery. Now, the entire art world knew how wrong he had been. But even in his growing desperation, Vincent held on to one small hope. He had heard rumors that Marcus was planning to make a visit to his gallery. At first, Vincent had brushed it off as idle gossip, but as the day approached, the whispers grew louder. People spoke of Marcus's interest in seeing the gallery that had once turned him away, of his desire to confront the man who had so publicly dismissed his legacy. The idea made Vincent uneasy, but he couldn't ignore it. If Marcus came, he had to be ready. The gallery owner knew that he was at a crossroads. This could be his chance to redeem himself, to apologize and make amends. Or, it could be his final mistake. The doorbell chimed, breaking his reverie. Vincent looked up, startled, and quickly adjusted his tie before standing up. His heart rate quickened. He had expected Marcus to come, but now that the moment was here, he wasn't sure what to expect. He couldn't decide if he was relieved or terrified. When he stepped into the lobby to greet the visitor, his breath caught in his throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Marcus Devereux. The artist, dressed in an understated yet impeccably tailored suit, had an air of quiet confidence that Vincent had never seen before. Gone was the uncertainty of the young man who had come to him years ago, pleading for a chance. In his place stood someone who commanded respect without needing to ask for it. His eyes, once full of anticipation and hope, now carried the weight of his success, and that success was undeniable. "Mr. Devereux," Vincent said, his voice strained, forcing a smile he didn't quite feel. "It's an honor to have you here. I must say, I didn't expect the pleasure so soon." Marcus's gaze swept across the gallery with a slow, deliberate grace. His eyes lingered on the paintings, each one now under a completely different light. What had once been considered too avant-garde, too risky for the mainstream audience, had now become an increasingly valuable commodity. As he turned back to Vincent, the gallery owner's face reddened under the artist's steady gaze. "I'm sure you didn't," Marcus replied coolly, his tone neutral but firm. He didn't need to say more, the meaning behind his words was clear. He had been rejected here once, mocked, told that his work didn't belong. Now, he was standing in front of the very man who had made that mistake. Vincent forced himself to keep his composure, though his mind was racing. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, but Marcus's calm demeanor was unsettling. The artist wasn't here for revenge or confrontation, no, he was here to make a point, and Vincent could feel the weight of that point pressing down on him. This wasn't going to be a typical business transaction, this was a reckoning. "I must admit," Vincent began, his voice faltering slightly, "that I have followed your success with great admiration. Your work, well, it's hard to ignore what's been happening. I have to apologize for the way things were handled in the past. I see now that I made a grave mistake." Marcus studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "A grave mistake," he echoed, his voice low. "You didn't just make a mistake, Mr. Hawthorne. You dismissed my work publicly, ridiculed it in front of the very people who are now clamoring to buy it. You thought that your reputation could shape the art world, that you could dictate who was worthy of attention. And I was not. Vincent's face flushed with embarrassment. He had been prepared for Marcus's anger, but hearing the words out loud, hearing the truth of it, struck him harder than he had anticipated. I didn't understand, Vincent stammered, his professional composure cracking for the first time. I was wrong. I see that now. Your work is worth millions? Marcus interjected, his voice cutting through Vincent's words. There was no malice in his tone, just a quiet certainty. That's right. And not just my recent work, everything I've created has value, a value you were too blind to see. The paintings you called safe and uninspired, the pieces you turned away? They are now some of the most sought-after works in the world. They are part of a legacy, a family tradition that spans centuries. And now, people are paying millions for what you once called worthless. Vincent felt the weight of the words sink into him like stones. His reputation was in tatters, and now he was faced with the undeniable truth of his arrogance. The art world, once his domain, was slipping out of his grasp, and Marcus was the key to it all. The artist's works had become the centerpiece of a global art market, and now, Vincent realized, he was nothing more than a footnote in Marcus's rise. I didn't know, Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't realize the true value of your art. Marcus's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. Of course you didn't, he said quietly. You were too busy clinging to your own ego to see the truth. But now, you know. And now, you want something from me. Vincent swallowed hard, his throat dry. He could feel the desperation clawing at him. He had been wrong, terribly wrong, and now all he could do was beg for forgiveness. Please, Mr. Devereux, I've made a terrible mistake. I want to work with you. I want to showcase your work, feature it in our galleries. I'll do whatever it takes. I can't undo the past, but I can offer you something now. Marcus regarded him coolly, his expression unreadable. He wasn't moved by the desperation in Vincent's voice. He had heard these words before, from many others who had underestimated him. You want to offer me a deal now, Marcus said, his tone clipped. But before I make any decisions, I want you to understand one thing, you're not doing me a favor. The favor is mine. You have a chance to work with me, to share in the success I built. But make no mistake, I will never be desperate for anyone's approval again. Vincent nodded, his hands shaking as he extended a trembling hand. I understand. I am truly sorry, Mr. Devereux. I won't make the same mistake again. Marcus looked at the hand, then back at Vincent's face. He could see the sincerity in the man's eyes, but that didn't change the past. He had learned the lesson he needed to learn, and now, it was up to him whether or not to offer a second chance. I'll consider your proposal, Marcus said, his voice firm but not unkind. But make no mistake, Mr. Hawthorne. The next time you reject an artist, I hope you'll think long and hard about the value of their work. Because you never know when you might be looking at the next Devereux. As Marcus turned to leave, Vincent stood frozen, the reality of his mistake sinking deeper with every step the artist took. The humiliation was complete. The man he had once dismissed, the artist he had ridiculed, had proven him wrong in the most profound way. And now, all Vincent could do was watch as the man who had once been beneath him walked out the door, leaving him in the ruins of his own arrogance. In the weeks following his encounter with Vincent Hawthorne, Marcus Devereux had experienced a transformation that extended far beyond the art world's recognition of his talent. The success he had achieved, the millions of dollars his paintings were now fetching, the countless exhibitions, the worldwide acclaim, had shifted something in him. What had begun as a quiet journey in search of recognition and respect had evolved into something more profound. Marcus realized that he was no longer just an artist. He was a force in the art world, capable of shaping it in ways that he had never imagined. And with this newfound power, He began to think about how he could leverage his position not only to further his own success, but to redefine the very system that had once rejected him. One evening, as Marcus was sitting in his study, reflecting on his journey, a thought came to him, a thought that would change everything. He had spent years battling against a system that was rigged to prioritize fame, wealth, and established reputation over true talent. He had seen firsthand how artists with genuine vision were dismissed and discarded, their work ignored simply because they didn't fit the mold of what the art world considered valuable. He had been a victim of that system once. But now, he had the means to change it. It wasn't just about proving his worth anymore. It was about taking control of the very system that had once held him back. And the idea that had formed in his mind seemed both radical and irresistible. He would buy the very gallery that had once rejected him. Hawthorne and Company, the prestigious New York gallery that had so publicly ridiculed his work, would now be his. It was a daring move, but it was exactly the kind of bold step that Marcus had learned to take. In doing so, he would not only take control of his own destiny, but also rewrite the rules of the game for every artist who had been ignored, marginalized, or dismissed. Within days, Marcus's legal team had begun the process of acquiring Hawthorne and Company. The negotiations were discreet at first, no one in the art world knew what was happening behind the scenes. Vincent Hawthorne, now a desperate man trying to salvage his reputation, agreed to sell the gallery at a price that was far below its market value. He had no other choice. The gallery had been hemorrhaging money since its rejection of Marcus's work, and its once sterling reputation had been tarnished beyond repair. Hawthorne had no other buyers in sight, no other avenue through which to recover his standing. The moment Marcus's offer came, it was as if the final nail had been driven into the coffin of Vincent's career. When the deal was officially finalized, Marcus Devereux took control of the gallery with a quiet confidence. He walked through the gallery's sleek, white halls, the same halls where, years ago, he had been ridiculed, with a sense of purpose that radiated from every step he took. As the new owner, Marcus was not interested in simply maintaining the status quo. He was here to create a revolution. The art world needed to be reshaped, to be elevated to something more inclusive, more diverse, more open to the voices that had long been silenced. The first change Marcus made was immediately visible. The gallery's name was no longer Hawthorne and Company. It was now Devereux Contemporary, a new chapter for the institution and a reflection of his personal vision. The old brand, associated with elitism, arrogance, and exclusion, was gone. Instead, Marcus's gallery became a space that welcomed all artists, regardless of their background, their fame, or their style. It was a place where the definition of value would no longer be based solely on market trends or name recognition, but on genuine artistic merit. Marcus's new approach to curation was nothing short of revolutionary. He filled the gallery with works from up-and-coming artists who had been overlooked by other institutions. Artists from marginalized communities, those who had been ignored or dismissed for their unique perspectives, were now given the platform they deserved. The gallery's walls were adorned with vibrant works that celebrated diversity, individuality, and creative expression. There was no room for conformity in this new vision. Every artist's voice had a place in Devereux Contemporary, and every work was valued for its emotional depth and authenticity. Marcus's own work was, of course, showcased prominently. But he made it clear from the beginning that the gallery was not just about promoting his own career. It was about creating a space where artists could thrive, where their work could be seen, appreciated, and respected. The once rigid boundaries of the art world, where success was determined by who you knew and who could afford your pieces, began to crumble under Marcus's vision. His gallery became a beacon for artists who had previously struggled to find a voice in the mainstream, whether because of their race, gender, sexuality, or unconventional artistic style. The response to Devereux Contemporary was overwhelming. Critics, who had once dismissed Marcus's work, now celebrated his bold moves in reshaping the art world. The gallery became an overnight sensation, drawing visitors from around the globe. Art lovers, collectors, and curators who had once turned away from Marcus's work now flocked to see what he was doing, not just with his own paintings, but with the entire artistic landscape. And with this newfound respect came even more success for Marcus. His pieces continued to break records at auction, but now, he was seen not only as a successful artist but as a leader in the movement to redefine the art world. But the real change came in the form of the artists who were now able to showcase their work. Emerging painters, sculptors, and photographers, many of whom had been dismissed by other galleries for not fitting the marketable mold, were now receiving the attention they had long deserved. One such artist, Tasha Marquez, a talented painter whose work explored themes of racial identity and displacement, had spent years struggling to find a gallery that would take her seriously. When her paintings were showcased at Devereux Contemporary, they quickly became some of the most talked about pieces in the city. Tasha's work, once relegated to small exhibitions, was now commanding the attention of major collectors and critics, her voice finally being heard. Another artist, Khalil Adebayo, whose sculptures examined themes of environmentalism and human connection to nature, had been rejected by numerous prestigious galleries before he was offered a space at Marcus's gallery. His works, which had once been seen as too unconventional, now attracted a growing following. Khalil's sculptures, made from recycled materials, became a symbol of innovation and sustainability in art, and his work was now featured in major international exhibitions. Even established artists, those who had once been wary of Marcus's rise to power, began to take note. What Marcus had achieved with his gallery was not just about showcasing his own art, it was about changing the way art was valued, the way it was perceived, and the way it could shape society. He had used his success not only for personal gain but to uplift an entire generation of artists who had been overlooked. And in doing so, he had redefined the very concept of what it meant to be a successful artist. As Devereux Contemporary's reputation grew, so too did the impact of Marcus's vision. Art collectors who had once scoffed at his work now lined up to purchase pieces not just from him, but from the new artists who had been given a platform. The gallery became a symbol of inclusivity, a place where art was not defined by the wealth of the buyer or the name of the artist, but by the emotional power and significance of the work itself. The art market, once driven by exclusivity and prestige, had been democratized. And it was all because one artist had dared to challenge the system. For Vincent Hawthorne, the man who had once rejected Marcus's work, the reversal was nothing short of humiliating. He watched from the sideline,